Chapter 19. The Stone of Three Echoes. The silverwood grew quieter with every step. Not in peace, but in a way that felt unnatural, like the air had forgotten how to carry sound. Even her own breathing seemed muted, as though the trees themselves were swallowing it. Juliet slowed, one hand braced against the trunk of a black-barked ash, its surface cool and faintly slick beneath her palm. The air here was heavier, tinged with the faint metallic tang she had learned meant magic at work. Somewhere behind her, a shadow moved, too fluid for a branch's sway, too heavy for wind. She didn't turn. If it was the hawkkin, looking back would only give them the satisfaction of knowing she felt them. Instead, she adjusted the strap across her shoulder and stepped into a narrow corridor of twisted roots, their arches forcing her low. A pull thrummed at the edge of her mind, not from the trial's fear, but from something older. It was subtle at first, like a faint hum just beneath hearing, but it grew as she moved forward, matching the rhythm of her heartbeat. The stone is close. She didn't know how she knew. She simply did. Far off, a hawk cried, short, sharp, a warning to others. Juliet crouched in the shadow of a split boulder, scanning the slope ahead. There, through the tangle of silver-leafed branches, she caught her first glimpse, a pale fang of stone rising from the forest floor, its surface etched in lines that pulsed faintly in the half-light. The Stone of Three Echoes. It looked both impossibly ancient and alive, like the earth had grown it deliberately. She took a step toward it, and the hairs on her arms lifted. The hawkkin had changed their pattern. She could feel them now, fanning out instead of trailing her, their shadows closing the ring. The rules of the hunt were simple: reach the stone alive and carve the sigil. But no rule said they had to let her get that far. A flicker of movement to her right, bronze feathers. Another to her left, pale gold. Juliet tightened her grip on the obsidian shard. She could make a break for the stone, but that would draw them all at once. She could also retreat into the dead zone, but there were rumors in Rhea's voice about what hunted there after moonset. Her decision was made for her when a voice she knew brushed against the edge of her thoughts. Little healer. It wasn't sound. It was a vibration, deep and familiar, sparking against the rune in her chest. Juliet froze. Lucien, you are too close to the ring. They will strike from above. She turned slightly, scanning the canopy. You're not supposed to help me. A pause, heavy with meaning. Then don't call it help. Call it watching. Her heart tightened. She wanted to say more, but the air shifted, predator fast. A shadow detached from the canopy, talons gleaming. Juliet dropped into a roll, dirt and moss burning her palms. The talons scraped earth where her shoulder had been. She came up running, not away, but toward the stone. If she could reach it, maybe the hum would drown out the wings. The hum grew louder with every step until it was no longer just in Juliet's chest, but in the soles of her feet, in the marrow of her bones. The stone rose before her like a monolith pulled from a dream, pale as bleached bone, veined with silver, its surface alive with faint, shifting runes. Juliet slowed, both hands braced on her knees as she fought for breath. The hawkkin were still out there, she could hear their wings slicing the air, the rustle of feathers shifting against leather harnesses, but they had not closed in. They were circling. Waiting. She took the final steps into the clearing. The hum surged into a low vibration, and for a heartbeat the entire silverwood seemed to lean toward her. The stone wasn't just ancient, it was aware. Juliet reached out, her fingers trembling, and brushed the cool surface. The runes flared faintly, and a voice, not Lucien's, rose in her mind. It was layered, echoing in 3 tones at once: a man, a woman, and something that wasn't entirely either. Carve. She fumbled for the obsidian shard, her pulse a staccato drum. I don't know how. Carve, the voice repeated, the word like an order and a plea in one. Juliet glanced over her shoulder. Through the veil of branches, she caught a glimpse of the hawkkin leader, tall, wings folded, head tilted. He wasn't moving in to stop her. He was watching. Studying. Why aren't you attacking? She called, her voice unsteady. He smiled, slow and cruel. Because the trial is not the hunt, little human. The hunt is the distraction. Her stomach went cold. For what? For the stone to choose. She turned back to it, fingers tightening on the shard. The hum had grown urgent, almost impatient. The curves and lines in the stone's surface seemed to shift under her gaze, revealing patterns she didn't consciously know but somehow understood. She began to carve, the shard's tip scoring the stone with surprising ease. Each stroke sent a pulse of silver light into the ground, racing along unseen channels beneath the clearing. The air thickened, every breath tasting faintly of lightning. Halfway through, the voice in her mind deepened, carrying a new edge. "You are not the first." Flashes hit her. Other figures at this stone, beastkin, human, even a hawk-winged child, each carving, each watched by the same predatory patience from the trees. And over it all, a shadow, a sigil she did not understand, carved in black, sealing something away. The hawkkin leader stepped closer to the edge of the clearing. "Do you feel it, human? Do you feel what your wolf king has hidden from you?" Juliet's hand faltered. "What are you talking about?" "The stone remembers," he said softly. "It remembers the last human who stood there. And it remembers how your king let her die." Her grip went slack for a heartbeat, the shard slipping. Somewhere in the trees, she felt Lucien's presence flare, fierce, cold, and near breaking. "Do not listen," his voice growled in her mind. "Finish the sigil." But Juliet's hand trembled. The final stroke loomed, and with it, the weight of a choice she didn't yet understand. The hawkkin leader's eyes glinted. "Carve it, little human, and the truth will be laid bare for all the clans to see." Juliet's next breath came slow, deliberate. Her heart thundered in her ears, but she tightened her grip on the shard and raised it for the last cut. Chapter 20, The Moon's Memory. The last stroke sank into the stone with a sound that was not of stone breaking, but of air splitting, like a single, sharp note struck on an unseen instrument. Juliet staggered back as the entire monolith flared, the silver veins surging with light until the clearing was bathed in it. The ground trembled, roots curling upward in slow, serpentine motions, and the hum became a steady, ringing tone that pressed against her eardrums. Her vision blurred. The trees dissolved. The forest air grew sharp and cold, tinged with the scent of blood and smoke. She was no longer in the clearing. The stone's voice slid into her mind, threaded in 3 harmonies. "See." The image sharpened, she stood on the same ground, but it was years earlier. The trees were younger, the clearing smaller, and the stone stood unmarred, its face uncarved. At its base, a woman knelt. Human. Dark hair pulled into a braid, her shoulders bare, her hands clutching an obsidian shard. She carved with the same urgency Juliet had felt, the same trembling determination. Beastkin, wolfkin, hawkkin, even serpentkin ringed the clearing, their expressions a mix of fear and expectation. And at the front, towering over them all, stood Lucien. Younger, but only in the way storms change between seasons. His hair was shorter, his armor less elaborate, but his eyes, those same gold eyes, unblinking, fixed on the woman with a quiet, devastating intensity. The sigil she carved flared in gold, not silver. And when the last line fell into place, the stone's light surged, too bright, too fast. The woman cried out, clutching her chest, and the light in the rune turned black. Lucien moved then, not toward her, but away. His shoulders squared, his expression hard as the council surged forward. The woman's eyes found his, her lips forming a single word. Juliet could almost hear it before she collapsed, her form a soft heap on the ground. The clearing shook again, the memory fragmenting. The voices around her blended into a single, roaring judgment. The king let her fall. Juliet's knees hit the ground. She could feel her own pulse in her throat, fast and unsteady. She didn't know who the woman was, but she didn't need to. The truth was etched into the memory, the same kind of human fate, the same trial, the same stone. And Lucien had not saved her. The vision snapped away. She was back in the clearing, the silver light dimming, the air heavy and expectant. The hawkkin leader stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "The stone remembers," he murmured. "It never lies." Juliet swallowed hard. "Why did you show me this?" "So you understand what the Wolf King will do when the choice comes again." The shadows stirred at the clearing's edge. Lucien emerged, his golden eyes blazing, his expression a mask of iron. His presence filled the space like a storm breaking, and for a moment, no one moved. "Enough," he said, his voice low but carrying. Juliet's hand tightened around the shard. She had never wanted to see him as the Hawkkin saw him. But the image was burned into her. And she didn't yet know if she could carve it out. Lucien crossed the clearing in slow, deliberate steps, each one a warning. The Hawkkin guards stiffened, talons curling, but their leader lifted a wing in restraint, his attention locked on Juliet. "You saw it," the Hawkkin said, his voice soft as a knife sliding free of its sheath. Lucien's reply was a growl. She saw nothing. Juliet's breath caught. "That's not true." Golden eyes cut to hers, fierce, but shadowed by something heavier than anger. "Not here," they seemed to say. "Not now." The Hawkkin leader's beak curved in a knowing smile. "Afraid she will learn you have failed before?" Lucien's hand shot out, fisting the front of the Hawkkin's armor and slamming him back against the stone. Silver cracks bloomed in the surface, the glowing veins pulsing like a heartbeat. The forest went utterly still. "I will not warn you again," Lucien said, his voice low and edged in steel. The Hawkkin didn't flinch. "Then warn her. Tell her how the last human ended beneath this moon. Tell her why you let her die." Juliet's chest constricted, the vision from the stone still raw in her mind. Lucien shoved the Hawkkin away and turned toward her. "This trial is over." No, the word left her sharper than intended. "Not until you tell me what I saw." His jaw tightened. "You saw a shadow of the past. That is all." "That woman," Juliet's voice wavered, but she stepped forward anyway. "She was human. She carved here. And she died. Why?" Silence. And in it, she swore she felt the weight of his guilt, heavy as the stone itself. "It doesn't matter," he said at last, turning away. "It does to me," she whispered, every word trembling. "Because if the choice comes again, I need to know which way you'll turn." The Hawkkin laughed softly, like a vulture over fresh carrion. "At last, the human asks the only question worth asking." Lucien's hands curled into fists. He said nothing. He only walked into the shadows of the trees, his back to her. "We leave. Now." Juliet stayed by the stone, its cool surface pressing into her spine, the light inside it dimming. She knew she should follow, but the question still burned, unanswered. And deep in her bones, she feared she already knew. Chapter 21, Queen by Choice. The walk back to the hollow was a silent war. Lucien moved ahead, his shoulders rigid, every step speaking of a restraint barely held. Juliet kept her distance, the echo of the stone's vision throbbing behind her eyes. She wanted to demand answers, but the forest itself seemed to shush her, each silver leaf whispering of storms yet to break. When they emerged into the council amphitheater, the air was already heavy with unrest. The clans had gathered again, not in the ordered ranks of a formal assembly, but in a restless sprawl, their voices low and tense. Rumors had clearly reached them before Lucien returned. Rhea intercepted Juliet before she could follow him down the central steps. The foxwoman's ears twitched toward the far end of the hollow, where the Hawkkin delegation stood together, their feathers slicked close in anticipation. "They're moving sooner than we thought," Rhea murmured, her voice a tight whisper. This wasn't about the hunt, it was bait. Juliet's stomach tightened. For what? Doubt. Division. A strike when the clans are watching. Down in the center, Lucien stepped onto the stone platform. His armor gleamed with silver runes, but his expression was the true weapon, calm, cold, unshakable. "The trial is void," he said, his voice carrying easily across the space. "The hunt was tainted by interference. The human stands under my protection still." The lion matriarch rose, her manner bristling. "Then you defy the council's will again." Lucien's gaze didn't waver. "I uphold the law. You would see it broken to spill her blood." The Hawkkin ambassador stepped forward. "We would see a king who is not bound by weakness. You hide her like a secret you cannot name." "She is not hidden," Lucien said, cutting across him with a voice like steel. "She stands before you." And Juliet realized he meant for her to step forward. Every instinct told her to stay behind Rhea, to melt into the shadows, but something in his tone, in the faint tilt of his head, was a command she could not refuse. She walked down into the circle, the king's cloak heavy on her shoulders, the blade at her side a cool, silent weight. Dozens of eyes followed her. Some with hunger. Some with hate. A rare few rears among them, with a glimmer of hope. The Hawkkin ambassador's beak clicked once, sharply. Then let the clans see her worth. Here. Now. It happened quickly, too quickly for her to track. A ripple of motion among the Hawkkin guards, a glint of metal in the sun, and the council chamber erupted into chaos. Steel clanged. Voices shouted. Somewhere behind her, Rhea called her name. But Juliet's gaze locked on one figure, Dravik of the Iron Fangs, striding into the hollow with a predator's certainty, his eyes fixed not on Lucien, but on her. The coup had begun. The first strike never touched her. Lucien was there, sudden as a shadow breaking from the trees, his sword intercepting Dravik's with a ringing clash that echoed against the hollow stone. The impact sent a shock through the air, scattering dust and fragments of old leaves. Coward, Lucien snarled, fangs bared. You would draw steel on an unarmed council guest. She's no guest, Dravik spat, shoving forward. She's the doom your own moons warned of. The circle fractured into pockets of combat, Hawkkin and Iron Fangs pressing toward the center while loyalists surged to block them. The Lion Matriarch roared, rallying her warriors to hold the western arch. Rhea darted through the chaos like a flame in the wind, her daggers flashing silver. Juliet stood frozen, the noise pounding in her skull, until a hand closed around her wrist. Rhea's golden eyes found hers for the briefest moment. Now, the foxwoman breathed. Do what you came to do. And Juliet knew. Not fight, lead. She ducked under Rhea's arm and ran toward the central platform, the king's cloak flying behind her like a banner. Shouts followed, but so did eyes, turning toward her as she climbed the steps, her small human form stark against the carved runes of the dais. From here she could see everything, the rippling tide of battle, the split loyalties, the hesitation in warriors' movements. This fight wasn't decided yet. Her hand went to the hilt at her side. She drew the blade Lucien had given her, its black ice metal drinking the moonlight. For a heartbeat, she just held it aloft. Then she knelt, pressing the point to the stone beneath her, and began to carve. The language came unbidden, curves and cuts from a place deeper than memory. She felt the mark under her collarbone throb, silver heat pouring into her veins. The air thickened, every sound dulled, until all she could hear was the whisper of blade on stone. A ring of light bloomed outward from the platform, spilling across the hollow in a sweeping arc. Where it touched, warriors froze, not bound, but stilled, as though the light asked them to choose between chaos and peace. When the glow faded, every eye was on her. And on Dravik, whose arm now bore a seared sigil, the same as hers, burning through his armor. You are bound, she said, her voice clear though her hands shook. To peace. To trial without blood. Gasps rippled through the council. A Hawkkin guard dropped his spear. Dravik tore at the glowing mark, but it would not fade. He looked at her with something close to fear, and for the first time, she saw a predator hesitate. Lucien stepped forward, his blade lowered but his presence towering. The council will decide his fate, he said. Not the mob. Not the Hawkins' whispers. Here. Now. Silence followed. Then the Lion Matriarch raised her hand. The human has done what many of us could not. She ended this without slaughter. The council stands with the Wolf King. One by one, voices joined her. Reluctant at first. Then louder. Until the hollow echoed not with steel, but with unity. Lucien's gaze met Juliet's. For the first time, there was no wall in it, only the raw, unguarded truth of a man who had been given something he thought was lost forever. When the vote was sealed and Dravik was dragged away in chains, Lucien crossed to her. The cloak on her shoulders was heavy with his scent, his heat. You should never have been here, he murmured, his voice low and intimate. But I am glad you are. Juliet swallowed hard. Then keep me here. By choice. Not by moon. His hand rose, almost touching her cheek, before falling away. Tomorrow. It was both a promise and a warning. Chapter 22, The Last Trial. The hollow was not the same place it had been that morning. The blood was scrubbed from the stone, but the scent of it lingered, copper and smoke beneath the perfume of crushed silver leaf. Beastkin voices carried through the night in low, restless murmurs. Even victory had a taste of unease. Juliet sat beneath the great den's archway, the king's cloak wrapped around her shoulders, watching the moonlight sift through the high branches. Rhea crouched nearby, polishing her daggers in silence, her quiet presence a familiar comfort. "They won't forgive easily," the foxwoman said at last. "Not you. Not him." Juliet didn't look away from the moons. "I didn't ask for their forgiveness." Rhea's ears twitched, her tone half a sigh, half a warning. "Careful. In their ion, pride and defiance can be the same knife." Before Juliet could answer, a ripple of motion stirred the shadows at the far end of the hall. Lucien emerged, his armor gone, his black hair loose around his shoulders. He looked more like the man she'd first seen in the forest, wild, self-contained, the quiet weight of a predator in every step. He stopped before her, studying her with those gold, inhuman eyes. "Walk with me." The words were not a request, but a deep, resonant invitation. They took the winding path through the silverwood, the night alive with the whisper of leaves and the faint glow of moonmoss underfoot. For a while, neither spoke. It was as if the forest itself was listening, holding its breath for them. Finally, Lucien said, "The council accepted your binding mark. It saved lives." Juliet heard the but in his voice before he spoke it. But his jaw tightened. It was the mark the prophecy spoke of. The human bearer of light, the one who would doom the Wolf King. Juliet's steps faltered. "You think that's me?" "I think," he said quietly, "that the moon never lies. And I have lived my life trying to outrun its truths." They stopped at the edge of a cliff, the cliff, she realized, where she had first fallen into their ion. Below, the forest stretched in silver and shadow, the wind tasting faintly of the sea she had once meant to meet with her final breath. "I have lost before," Lucien said, his voice low, almost rough with a buried emotion. "A mate. A child. A kingdom nearly undone. If you are meant to be my undoing, Juliet." She turned to face him fully. "Then what?" "Then I would rather it be by your hand than anyone else's." The moonlight caught in the angles of his face, in the unguarded ache of his expression. For a heartbeat, she felt the prophecy as something alive between them, an invisible tether pulled taut by fate, by fear, by the impossible choice of whether to trust. She took a slow step closer, her voice a whisper. "Maybe the moon isn't warning you about me. Maybe it's warning you about what happens if you keep pushing me away." For the first time, he looked away from her. Not in anger, but in something far more dangerous, hesitation. Behind them, deep in the trees, a wolf howled. The sound was answered by others, some loyal, some not. And Juliet knew the final trial was no longer political. It was personal. The answering howls grew closer. Too close. Lucien's head snapped toward the sound, every muscle tensing, his hand dropping instinctively to the hilt of his blade. "Stay behind me," he murmured, though his voice carried the sharp edge of a command. The tree line fractured, shapes moving between the silver trunks, eyes glinting like shards of amber and crimson. Not the disciplined stance of loyal hunters. This was something feral. Dravik's iron fangs. Juliet's hand went to her own weapon. "I thought he was in chains." Lucien's mouth was a hard line. "Chains mean nothing if the lock was bought." The first wolfkin lunged from the shadows, claws outstretched. Lucien met him mid-leap, the clash of steel and bone ringing in the air. The force drove both of them back toward the cliff's edge, but Lucien moved with brutal precision, his strikes controlled, efficient. More came, 3, then 5, circling them. Juliet stepped back, her boot finding the uneven lip of stone. The sea's wind rose from far below, carrying the smell of salt and memory. She swung when the first came at her, the black ice blade biting deep into a forearm before she was shoved aside. Pain bloomed in her shoulder, hot and immediate, but she stayed on her feet. Lucien roared, not words, but something older, a sound of primal fury that split the air like the crack of a storm. The sound shook the others for a breath, just enough for him to cut one down and throw another into the trees. Then she saw him, Dravik, emerging from the dark, his own chest bare to show the still glowing brand of her sigil. "You've made my death certain, human," he snarled, eyes locked on her. "So I'll take you with me." He came fast. Too fast. Lucien moved between them, but Dravik feinted, cutting low, forcing the Wolf King to parry. The fight pulled them both dangerously near the cliff's drop. Juliet's breath burned in her lungs as she closed the distance, her blade raised, not to kill, but to carve. She caught Dravik's arm mid-swing, pressing her weapon against the brand until the silver light flared so bright it seared them both. Dravik screamed, the sound more beast than man, and wrenched free. The force sent him stumbling backward over the edge. Lucien caught her before she could follow him down, one arm tight around her waist. The roar of the sea rose to meet them, then faded as Dravik's body vanished into the dark. For a long moment, they just stood there, his breath harsh against her hair, her heart pounding in her throat, the feel of his arms a sudden, breathtaking shield. When he finally spoke, it was quiet. "You could have let me finish it." Juliet shook her head. "And become the prophecy?" "No." His grip tightened, not in anger, but in something like fear. "You think saving me changes its course?" She turned in his hold to meet his gaze, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I think we make the course. Not the moon. Not the council. Us." Lucien's golden eyes searched hers for a long, unblinking moment. And for the first time, he didn't argue. Far above, the silver moon flared, as if listening. Chapter 23, The Crown and the Bond. By dawn, the hollow was alive again, not with the joyful noise of celebration, but with the slow, deliberate pulse of survival. The bodies of Dravik's followers had been carried beyond the village boundary, their names never spoken again. The laws of the Therion demanded silence for traitors. Juliet moved through the aftermath like someone walking through the ruins of a dream. The king's cloak still lay across her shoulders, the black ice blade still strapped to her hip. She could feel eyes following her, but they weren't the same eyes as before. There was no open hatred now. Only watchfulness. Calculation. Rhea found her near the central tree, her steps quiet as a shadow. "They saw you fight. That will change things. Enough to make them stop seeing me as prey?" Juliet asked, not bothering to hide the dryness in her tone. "Enough," Rhea said softly, her fox-like ears twitching, "to make them wonder if you could be more." Before Juliet could reply, the call of the council horn rolled through the air, a deep, resonant note that made the very branches tremble. Inside the hollow, the clans were already assembled. Lucien stood at the center, armored again, the silver runes across his chest catching the morning light. When he saw her enter, his gaze lingered for a heartbeat longer than it needed to, enough for the murmurs in the crowd to rise and shift like wind through dry leaves. The lion matriarch was the first to speak. "Dravik is gone. The human lives. The Wolf King remains." The Hawkkin ambassador tilted his head, feathers rippling in a faint breeze. "And yet the prophecy still hangs over this hall. What will you do with her, Lucien Blackfang?" Juliet felt the question land like a stone in her chest. This was the moment she had expected, feared. Lucien didn't look at them when he answered. He looked at her, his golden eyes a quiet fire in the morning light. "I will keep her," he said. The words were simple, but they hit like a hammer on iron. Murmurs rose at once, some angry, some startled, some approving. The Serpentkin elder raised a long, scaled hand. "Keep her as what? A ward? A prisoner? A weapon?" Lucien's voice deepened, a low, profound rumble, his gaze never leaving Juliet's. "As queen." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind outside seemed to still. Juliet's breath caught, her heart pounding loud enough that she was sure the closest wolfkin could hear it. She had thought of survival, of freedom, but not of this. Rhea, at her side, was the only one who moved, her tail curling around her ankles. "You don't have to," she began in a whisper. But Lucien was already stepping toward her, his voice carrying to every ear in the hollow. "Not by the council's demand. Not by tradition. By my choice. And hers." The last two words struck her harder than all the rest. And hers. He was not ordering her. He was asking her. In front of all of them. The power in the room shifted. She could feel it in the stillness of the guards, in the unblinking gaze of the matriarchs, in the sudden absence of the old suspicion. The decision was no longer about survival, it was about claiming a place that no other human had held in centuries. And for a moment, she didn't know if the shiver running through her was fear, or something dangerously close to longing. The hollow waited, dozens of eyes fixed on her, each gaze heavy with its own judgment. Some glittered with hostility, others with curiosity, a rare few with something like hope. Juliet's throat felt tight, the weight of the black ice blade at her hip suddenly doubled. She could still smell the smoke from last night's battle on Lucien's skin, could still see the faint mark where Dravik's strike had nearly cut him down. The thought of leaving him to face all of this alone turned her stomach. And yet, to accept meant binding herself to this place, to this world, to him. It meant never going back. Juliet, Lucien said softly, so softly the council could barely hear it. No one will speak for you but you. She drew a long breath, feeling the cool taste of moonlit air settle her pulse. You ask if I will be queen, she said, her voice carrying farther than she expected. But what you're really asking is if I will belong to this world. The lion matriarch leaned forward, her manner catching the light. And will you? Juliet let her gaze sweep over them all, the wolves, the hawkkin, the scaled and the furred, and then returned it to Lucien. His eyes held no demand, only a deep, steady patience that almost undid her. Yes, she said, and the word landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through the hollow. I will stand at his side. Not as a shadow. Not as prey. As his equal. Lucien's jaw tightened, and in that slight motion she saw the only sign of how deeply the words struck him. Around them, the murmurs rose again, sharp and uncertain. The hawkkin ambassador clicked his beak. A human equal to the wolf king. Juliet took a step forward, her voice colder now. Then let the moon judge if I am worthy. You've already tried to kill me once. I'm still here. That silenced him. Lucien moved then, not with the dominating stride of a ruler, but with the measured approach of a man stepping across a dangerous threshold. He stopped just in front of her, close enough that she could see the gold in his eyes flicker in the firelight. Then take the vow, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Her heart pounded. And if I do? He dipped his head just enough that the council could not read the moment between them. Then I will take mine. Juliet swallowed hard, her fingers brushing the hilt of her blade as if to steady herself. Do it. The Wolf King turned to the gathered clans. By moonrise, we will stand beneath the silver light. And you will see that her place here is not yours to give or take. The lion matriarch's smile was slow and knowing. Then let the moon bear witness. As the council dispersed, Lucien lingered, his gaze never leaving Juliet's face. Only when they were alone enough that Rhea's shadow was the nearest presence did he speak again. You could still walk away, he said quietly. No one here would stop you. Juliet looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, she didn't see the Wolf King, or the man who had dragged her from the edge of death. She saw the one who had carried her through a forest of silver trees when she couldn't stand. The one who had taken the first blow in her defense, and the one who had been willing to let her choose. Her voice was steady when she answered. I'm not walking away from you. For a moment, he didn't move. Then his hand came to her jaw, his thumb brushing lightly over her cheek, not a claiming, not a command, but something far rarer. A promise. When he let go, the absence was almost unbearable. Then be ready, he said, his voice dark and certain. The moon will demand more than words. Chapter 24, The Vow Beneath the Silver Light. By the time the first of Therion's 3 moons rose, the hollow was no longer a place of politics. It had transformed into a sanctum, a sacred circle where every breath felt heavy with a different kind of magic. The central clearing was encircled by tall torches, their flames bending in the night wind, casting wild shadows across the carved stone ring. Runes etched into the ground glimmered faintly as if lit from within, pulsing in rhythm with the silver moon's slow ascent. Juliet stood just beyond the ring, the king's cloak falling in heavy folds around her shoulders, her ceremonial tunic stitched with moonthread that caught the torchlight like frost. Rhea stood beside her, fussing with the folds of her hood, her hands a gentle, grounding weight. Remember, Rhea whispered, her golden eyes steady. When he speaks the old words, you must answer in the same tongue. The rune in your chest will guide you. Juliet exhaled slowly, willing her heartbeat to steady. And if it doesn't? Rhea's tail flicked once, sharply. Then you'll be bound in silence. Which is worse than death here. That wasn't particularly comforting, but in the hush of the hollow, it was a simple, stark truth. Across the ring, Lucien approached in full ceremonial armor, polished black steel inlaid with curling silver sigils that seemed almost alive in the moonlight. His hair was unbound, falling in a dark wave over his shoulders, and the expression on his face, it was the one he wore in battle, but tempered with something she had only glimpsed in rare, unguarded moments. It was fierce, but it was also profoundly vulnerable. When he stepped into the torchlight, the watching clans fell silent. No growl, no murmur, no rustle of fur or feather. Just a stillness as deep as the forest's heart, a shared breath held in anticipation. The lion matriarch, flanked by two younger warriors, spoke first. Wolf King. Human. Step into the moon's eye. Juliet felt her legs move before her mind caught up. The stone beneath her feet was cool, almost damp, and as she entered the ring's center, the runes underfoot brightened, threads of silver light weaving through their curves. Lucien joined her, his gaze locking onto hers the moment he stopped. In the full glow of the silver moon, his eyes seemed to burn not with fire, but with a fierce, impossible clarity that saw straight into her soul. You stand in the moon's eye, the matriarch intoned, her voice echoing in the cold air, and in the sight of every clan. If you bind yourselves here, no hand, not council, not clan, not fate, can unbind you. Juliet's throat tightened. No going back. Lucien stepped closer, his voice dropping into the old language, low and resonant. The rune in her chest thrummed at the first syllable, translating not just the words but the deep, unwavering intent behind them. I vow, he said, to guard your life as I guard my own. To stand before you in battle, and behind you in council. To take no other above you in my heart, in my den, or beneath my moon. The words struck something deep in her chest, almost painfully. She could feel the choice pressing against her ribs, terrifying, irrevocable, and somehow exactly what she had been walking toward since the cliff. It was her turn to speak. Chapter 25. The Queen's First Blood. Dawn came cold and sharp, a blade of pale gold slicing through the hollow's mist. The torches from the vow ritual had long burned out, leaving only faint wisps of smoke curling into the morning air. Juliet had not slept. She sat at the edge of the king's den, the cloak still wrapped around her shoulders, her fingers tracing the seam of the blade at her hip. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt again the heat of Lucien's hand over her rune, the moon's light wrapping them in silver. It was dangerously romantic, how easily that memory could quiet the part of her that had been braced for war. The war came anyway. The first sound was a horn, low, brassy, and meant for summoning warriors. The second was shouting in 3 different languages, some of which she still couldn't fully understand. Rhea burst into the den, her ears pinned flat. Get up. Juliet rose without question. What is it? A challenge, Rhea said, already thrusting a leather guard onto Juliet's forearm. Lion Clan. The matriarch's heir says your vow is a farce, that a human can't be bound by the moon's word. She's demanding combat to test the bond. Juliet froze. Combat? With me? No, Rhea said grimly. With him. Outside, the hollow was already gathering. The Lion Clan heir, a tall, broad-shouldered woman with gold-braided hair and eyes like molten amber, stood in the arena's center, her tail lashing in agitation. She wore no armor, only clawed gauntlets, her bare arms gleaming with oil and dust. Lucien was there too, stripped to the waist, his expression carved from stone. The crowd around them pressed in, murmuring, their breath misting in the cold air. When Juliet appeared, the heir's gaze snapped to her, a direct challenge in the golden depths. If your bond is true, she said in a voice that carried easily over the space, then the king will fight as though your life depends on it. Because it will. Juliet's stomach tightened. What happens if? Rhea cut her off. Then they'll call your vow void. And you'll be prey again. The heir smiled, a slow, sharp baring of teeth, and flexed her claws. Let us see if the Wolf King bleeds for his human. The heir moved first, a blur of golden muscle and flashing claws. Juliet had seen beasts fight before, but nothing like this. The strikes were too fast, too precise, each one meant to maim, not simply test. Lucien met her charge without flinching, the impact cracking through the hollow like thunder. Claw met claw. Flesh met stone. Dust rose in choking spirals around them. Juliet wanted to look away, but she couldn't. Every blow the air landed echoed in her bones, every hit Lucien returned pulled something taut in her chest, a silent, painful tether. He was fighting as if there was no one else in the world, only her, and the sacred space between life and death. The air darted low, claws raking across Lucien's ribs. Blood welled, dark, hot, and terribly real. The crowd roared. Juliet's hand went instinctively to her rune, the skin beneath it burning with a deep, answering warmth. Lucien's head snapped toward her for just a fraction of a heartbeat. That was all the air needed. Her claws caught his shoulder, scoring deep. Gasps rippled through the watching clans. Someone shouted, "The bond is weak." Juliet stepped forward before she thought, her voice cutting through the noise. "Lucien." The sound of his name from her lips did something. She saw it in the way his shoulders squared, in the way his golden eyes flared with a sudden, fierce heat. The next time the air lunged, he caught her wrist mid-strike, twisting until she dropped to one knee. She snarled, tried to rake her other claw across his chest, but he blocked, spun her, and slammed her to the packed earth. The hollow went silent. Lucien didn't finish her. He stood over the air, breathing hard, his claws at her throat but not breaking the skin. When he spoke, it was for everyone to hear. "This bond is not for you to test. It is not yours to judge. She stands because I stand. And I stand because the moon wills it." He released the air, who rolled away with a growl but did not rise to challenge again. The matriarch, watching from the stone seats, inclined her head just barely, acknowledging the outcome without smiling. Lucien turned to Juliet. For a long, charged moment, they simply stared at each other, the distance between them feeling both vast and non-existent. Then he crossed the arena, blood streaking his ribs, and placed his clawed hand over her rune in full view of the clans. The touch was light. The meaning was not. "She is mine," he said to the crowd, "and I am hers." The hollow erupted, some voices in cheers, others in snarls. But none stepped forward to dispute him. Chapter 26, The Moon's Shadow. The hollow looked different at night. It wasn't just the absence of daylight, but the way the three moons altered the space, painting the stones and hanging moss in alternating swathes of silver, blood, and blue. Shadows moved strangely here, stretching longer than their sources, as though they were listening to some other gravity, some other call. Juliet stood at the edge of the council ring, the cold stone biting through the soles of her boots. Rhea was a silent presence just behind her shoulder, her tail curled low, ears angled forward, every line of her body watchful. They weren't here for ceremony. The voices that rose from the center of the hollow were clipped, urgent, and sharp enough to cut. The Hawk Clan ambassador stood tall in the center, his feathers gleaming like wet steel under the moons. His robe of silver thread fluttered in the wind, giving the illusion of wings poised to strike. When he spoke, his voice was clear and cold, designed to carry across the open space. "The prophecy has shifted. It no longer warns, it has begun." Murmurs rippled outward like a spreading crack in glass. Lucien, standing on the opposite side of the circle, did not move. His golden eyes tracked the hawk with a predator's stillness. The ambassador's beak clicked once. You all saw it. The duel, fought under the gaze of the blood moon, spilling the Wolf King's blood. The omen is fulfilled in its first measure. Do we wait for the rest? Or do we act? Juliet felt the council's eyes drift toward her, hot and heavy, their curiosity like talons against her skin. She forced herself not to fidget, not to draw the cloak tighter. To move would be to admit discomfort, and she'd learned enough in their ion to know discomfort was weakness. Rhea leaned in, whispering, "They smell fear. Don't let them." Juliet kept her chin lifted, though her pulse pounded in her throat. A Wolf Clan elder spoke, his voice gravelly but strong. The duel was sanctioned. Blood is the coin of challenge. This is nothing. Nothing, the hawk snapped, feathers ruffling in outrage. When the prophecy's first words are met, the human bearer of light will doom the Wolf King. Or will you pretend the moons themselves did not watch her standing over him in the hollow? The murmuring deepened. Even those who'd stood by Lucien looked uneasy now, their gazes flicking between him and Juliet. Lucien's voice finally broke the air, low, measured, but carrying the weight of command. The moon calls what it calls. It called her. And while she stands in my den, my protection is not in question. The hawk bowed his head in mock respect. Of course, Wolf King. But protection is not immortality. And some of us remember what happens when the moons take back what they give. The council broke then, not with a decision but with a scent of unfinished business, that thick, metallic tang of a wound not yet closed. By the time Juliet followed Rhea out of the hollow, the night air felt sharper. It smelled of pine and smoke and something else, metal, heated to the edge of melting. The torchlight from the council chamber faded behind them, swallowed by the black curve of the den's shadow. They're planning something, Juliet said, her voice low. Rhea's ears twitched. The hawks always are. They were halfway to the den when Juliet caught it, a sound so soft she almost thought it was the wind. A whisper in the old tongue, curling around her ear like smoke. She froze. Did you hear that? Rhea turned, every line of her body taut. Hear what? The words came again, barely more than breath. The moon will take him through you. Juliet's skin prickled, every fine hair lifting. Someone's here. A rustle in the trees. The flash of a pale feather. Then silence, so complete it rang in her ears. Lucien was waiting for her at the den's entrance, armor stripped away, hair loose around his face. His gaze swept over her in one clean pass, taking in the tension in her shoulders. What happened? Juliet hesitated, then told him, the whisper, the words. His expression didn't change, but something in his scent shifted, that subtle tightening of pine and smoke that meant danger. His eyes flicked to Rhea. Double the guard. No one enters the den without my word. Rhea bowed and vanished into the shadows. Lucien stepped closer to Juliet, his voice quiet enough that it belonged only to her. If they're right, if the prophecy lives in you, then they will try to make it breathe sooner. He lifted a hand, just brushing her collarbone with his thumb. The touch was fleeting, almost unintentional, but when he pulled it back, Juliet saw the faintest glow of silver on his skin. She looked down and saw it mirrored there, over her heart. A crescent mark, delicate but bright, pulsing once like a heartbeat. Her own. Lucien's jaw tightened. They've marked you. Juliet stared at the glow above her heart, her breath caught halfway between inhale and exhale. The silver light was faint, no stronger than the glimmer of moonlight on water, but it moved, pulsing softly, almost as though it were breathing with her. It's not painted, she whispered, touching it with trembling fingers. Her skin was unbroken, but the mark was there, burned into her like an echo under the flesh. What is it? Lucien didn't answer right away. His eyes held the mark as if by will alone he could burn it out of existence. An oath sigil, he said at last, the words heavy. Old magic. Bloodless, but binding. Whoever placed it has claimed a tie to you. Juliet's gaze snapped up. Claimed me? It isn't ownership, he said, though his tone suggested the line between the two was thin. It's a thread. Through it, they can call you. Influence you. Juliet's stomach tightened. Influence me to do what? Lucien's expression hardened, a slow, dangerous shift. Whatever fulfills their aim. If the prophecy says you will doom the Wolf King, he didn't finish, but the air between them grew heavier with the unspoken possibility. Rhea reappeared in the doorway, her breathing quick and shallow. No one saw anyone enter the den, she said, but there's a scent in the north passage. Feathers. Old blood. Hawk and serpent both. Lucien's eyes narrowed. They move together now. That's not supposed to happen, Rhea said grimly. They've been enemies for decades. It means they fear something more than they fear each other, Lucien replied. He looked at Juliet. And it wears your face. Juliet wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she wasn't a threat, that she was just a woman who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time, but the crescent mark pulsed again, and she could feel it now. Not just on her skin, but inside. A faint tug, a whisper curling through her mind in words she couldn't quite hear. She wrapped her arms around herself. Can you remove it? Lucien shook his head once. Not without breaking what it's tied to. And until we know who set it, severing it could do more harm than leaving it. So I'm just supposed to carry it, she said, the edge in her voice sharper than she intended. His gaze held hers, steady and unflinching. Until we find the one who marked you, yes. Juliet's mouth went dry. And if we don't find them? Lucien stepped closer, close enough that the heat of him softened the icy knot in her chest. Then I'll tear apart every den and hall in Therion until I do. It wasn't a promise. It was a vow. That night, sleep was not kind. Every time Juliet closed her eyes, she felt the mark flare not painfully, but insistently, as if something on the other end of that invisible thread was waiting. She woke more than once to find herself standing at the edge of the den's balcony, barefoot, staring out toward the forest without remembering how she'd gotten there. The third time it happened, she didn't go back inside. The moons hung heavy over the treetops, silver and red and blue weaving their light together into something almost tangible. Somewhere below, the forest shifted not in the wind, but in sound. A faint rustle, a soft crunch of leaves, the snap of a twig under deliberate weight. Juliet's breath caught. From the shadow of the trees, a figure stepped forward tall, cloaked, the gleam of feathers visible even in the half-light. A hawkkin. They stopped at the very edge of the moonlit clearing and tilted their head up to her. Slowly, deliberately, they raised one clawed hand and touched their own chest, the same spot where her mark pulsed. Juliet's heart slammed against her ribs. The hawk spread their hand, palm outward, and mouthed a single word. She couldn't hear it, but she felt it, through the thread that bound the mark to her heart. Come. Chapter 27, The Call Through the Mark. Juliet gripped the balcony rail so hard her fingers ached. The hawkkin below didn't move, only watched her with the stillness of a predator that had already chosen its moment to strike. That invisible thread between her heart and theirs thrummed in a slow, deliberate rhythm, not like a heartbeat, but like the measured toll of a distant bell. The mark above her heart warmed. Come. It wasn't sound, not exactly. It was thought, but not her own, brushing the inside of her mind with a familiarity that made her skin crawl. She stepped back from the balcony. The warmth dimmed, but didn't fade. Behind her, a shadow shifted. Lucien. I could smell them from the hall, he said, his voice low but edged. What did they do? Juliet turned, her heart pounding. They didn't speak. Just, she touched her chest, over the crescent mark. They called me. Lucien's eyes darkened, gold deepening to molten amber. And you listened. I didn't move, she said quickly, though it felt like a lie even to her. She hadn't gone to them, but every muscle in her body remembered the pull. His gaze flicked past her shoulder toward the forest. If they'd meant to kill you, they'd have tried here. This is something else. Rhea appeared in the archway, her tail twitching with irritation. You want me to chase them down? Lucien shook his head. No. They'll vanish into the trees before you're halfway there. This was a message, not an attack. Juliet swallowed. What message? Lucien's voice was quiet, but each word landed like stone. That they can touch you, even here. That the council's protection means nothing. And that you will follow when they decide to pull the thread. They gathered in the den's war chamber, a round hall of dark stone and carved bone, its walls hung with maps inked on hide. A single silver brazier burned at the center, moonlight distilled into fire. Lucien stood at the head of the table, every line of his posture the wolf king, not the man. Rhea paced at the far side, too restless to sit. They've moved faster than I expected, Lucien said. If hawk and serpent are united, they'll make their strike before the next moonrise. And they'll use me, Juliet said quietly. Yes. He didn't soften it. They'll turn the prophecy into their weapon. To do that, they need you to stand where they can see you and where everyone else can. Juliet tightened her grip on the edge of the table. Then don't let me. Lucien's eyes met hers. That's not how this ends. It was Rhea who spoke the truth aloud. They're going to try to take you to the hollow, she said, and force you to speak the words they've planted in you. Juliet frowned. Words. The mark is more than a summons, Lucien said. It's a channel. It can feed you their thoughts. Even make you believe they're your own. A chill slid down Juliet's spine. So how do we stop it? Lucien's answer was simple. We sever the thread. Rhea's ears flicked back. You know what that would cost her. Juliet looked between them. Cost me what? Lucien hesitated, and that, more than anything, made her blood run cold. Lucien's jaw tightened as though the words themselves might cut him. If we break the mark, Juliet, we break the rune bond it created. You'll lose their thread, yes, but you'll lose the one between us too. Her breath caught. Our bond. He nodded once, his eyes steady on hers. It was carved into you with the same blood. Mine. I could not scent you from across the hall without it. Could not find you in the forest. Could not feel you. Juliet's fingers curled at her sides. The idea of being free from the Hawkins pull should have been a relief, but the thought of severing that invisible link to him felt like someone tightening a fist around her ribs. And you? Would you feel nothing? I would still know you, he said, his voice low. But not in the way that matters. Not in the way the moon wove into us that night. Rhea leaned against the table, ears tilted back. It's not just the bond. Severing a mark burns the flesh, sometimes the soul. It takes part of you with it. Juliet looked down at her hands, flexing her fingers as if she might feel what would be lost. And if we don't break it? Lucien's gaze sharpened. Then they will use you before the clans, and they will speak their lies through your mouth. The moment you falter, the prophecy will be theirs to shape. The brazier's silver light cast shadows high along the walls. The weight of the choice pressed down like stone. Finally, Juliet straightened. Then we don't break it. Lucien's eyes narrowed. Juliet. No, she said firmly. If they think they can use this to pull me like a puppet, then let them try. I'll walk where they want me to, but I'll speak my words, not theirs. Rhea's tail lashed once, surprise flickering across her face. You'd risk the hollow? Juliet's pulse thudded, but her voice was steady. I've been prey before. I know how to survive when the teeth are at my throat. I'll make them think they've caught me, and then I'll turn it on them. For a long moment, Lucien said nothing. Then he stepped forward, the gold in his eyes bright as embers. If we do this, I will be at your back the entire time. If they so much as breathe wrong, they won't get the chance, Juliet finished for him, though her heart was already beating like a war drum. Chapter 28, The Gathering at the Hollow. The Hollow had never felt so crowded. Every clan was here. Wolves in silvered leather. Lionfolk with braids weighted in bone. Hawkkin perched on the great roots that curled above the stone ring, their wings tucked close like folded knives. Serpentkin glided between the shadows, their hoods flaring in slow, measured breaths. Juliet stood at the western arch, Lucien at her side, Rhea just behind. The mark on her chest burned faintly, not a sear, but a slow, insistent hum, like the vibration of a plucked string. She kept her chin high, though her fingers flexed at her sides, hungry for the feel of the blade's hilt. From the center, a voice rose, the serpent elder she had seen once before, his scales glinting in the fractured sunlight. Wolf King, he said, his tone carrying to every ear, you bring the omen among us again. Will you still deny what the moons have already whispered? Lucien didn't flinch. The moons speak to me, not to you. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Juliet's eyes flicked to the Hawkkin envoy, tall, robed in silver feathers, his beak curved like a crescent blade. His gaze never left her. Come. The word wasn't spoken aloud. It brushed across her thoughts, soft and patient, tugging at the thread of the mark. Juliet took one step forward, deliberately, so every eye could see it. Lucien shifted beside her, but she lifted a hand in silent reassurance. I have words for the hollow, she said, her voice carrying farther than she expected. If you'd hear them. The Hawkins' head tilted, a gesture of cold approval. Then speak, human. Speak the prophecy you carry. The mark pulsed harder, a rhythmic pressure behind her ribs. Words rose in her mind, smooth and silver, not hers. The human bearer of light will. She cut them off. Will choose her own fate. A ripple of disquiet passed through the ring. The Hawkins' feathers shivered with irritation. That is not the prophecy. No, Juliet said, stepping fully into the hollow's center, her voice sharpening like glass, it's the part you left out. Gasps. A low, rumbling growl from the Wolfkin ranks. The Hawkkin envoy's eyes narrowed to shards of obsidian. The serpent elder's voice was a hiss. You think to twist the moon's words? Juliet smiled, not kindly. I think to remind you that words are wind. And I don't break so easily. The Hawkkin envoy moved like wind through feathers, his wings flaring in a sudden sweep of silver light. The air shifted, not in sound, but in pressure, and the mark on Juliet's chest flared white-hot. Speak. The voice inside her skull was colder now, threaded with command. Tell them the Wolf King's reign will fall. Her breath caught. Her knees nearly buckled under the force of it. Images flooded her mind, the cliff, the moons, Lucien's blood on snow. They weren't memories. They were implants. Lucien took a step toward her, his hand hovering near his blade. Juliet. She forced her eyes to his. Don't. Her lips didn't move, but she willed him to understand. The envoy advanced. Say the truth, human. Give the hollow the omen it deserves. The heat from the mark became a burn, then a sear, as if it would brand her from the inside out. She could almost feel her tongue shaping their words, the thread of the mark pulling tighter around her throat. Then, she did the only thing she could. She bit down hard on the inside of her cheek until the taste of blood flooded her mouth. Pain cut through the mark's pull like a blade through cloth. When she spoke, her voice was raw but her own. You want prophecy? Here's one. The Wolf King will stand when your wings are ash, and your coils are cut. Gasps broke around the hollow. The serpent elder's hood flared wide, his tongue tasting the air like a threat. The Hawkkin envoy's feathers bristled, his beak parting in a hiss of fury. The pull in her chest tightened, then snapped. Juliet staggered, clutching at the front of her tunic. The mark's glow dimmed, its steady hum gone. Lucien was beside her in an instant, one arm at her back, his body a solid wall between her and the ring. The Hawkkin envoy's voice was a low, venomous rasp. You've severed it. Lucien bared his teeth. She broke it herself. The serpent elder's eyes glimmered. Then she has power neither of you understand. And power like that draws war. The hollow erupted into low, angry voices, the clans dividing into muttering factions. Lucien turned, half-shielding Juliet as he guided her toward the arch rear was already there, tail lashing in alarm. As they stepped out of the ring, Juliet felt the cold air bite her lungs and realized she was trembling. Not from the loss of the mark, but from the way the Hawkins' eyes had followed her until the last moment, full of promise. A promise of another, far more dangerous strike. Chapter 29, When the Moons Go Dark. That night, the moons hid. No silver light spilled between the trees, no glow touched the watchtowers. The forest beyond the village walls seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind was absent, as if it feared to pass through their ion. Juliet sat on the edge of the firs in Lucien's den, her knees drawn to her chest. The mark on her collarbone was dull now, not gone, but inert, a scar more than a living sigil. And yet she could feel the echo of its pull, like the ache of a phantom limb. Lucien had been silent since the hollow, pacing the width of the den with the slow, lethal stride of a wolf before a hunt. His armor lay discarded by the hearth, but his sword was never more than a step away. They'll come, Juliet said finally. Her voice sounded smaller than she meant it to. They already have. He paused, his gaze flicking toward the shadowed doorway. They test the edges of the forest. Hawkkin scouts. Serpentkin spies. Nothing that breaches the warded lines, yet. Rhea entered without ceremony, her tail lashing in tight arcs. The lionfolk are restless. Some want the king to challenge the hawk envoy before dawn. Others think the girl should be sent away, now. Juliet unfolded herself slowly. If you send me away, they'll hunt me. You know that. Lucien's eyes, golden in the firelight, found hers. I don't send away what's under my protection. That should have comforted her, but his tone was more like a vow carved in stone than a gentle promise. Rhea knelt near the hearth, speaking low. They will not wait for the next council. If they want to move against the king, they'll do it before the moons rise again. As if to punctuate her words, a sound rippled through the den, not a howl, but a long, low horn blast from the eastern wall. One. Then two more in quick succession. Lucien was moving before the third ended, his hand closing around his sword hilt. They're here. Juliet rose, heart pounding, the furs sliding from her shoulders. Then let me fight. His gaze sharpened. No. She stepped forward. I'm not prey. For a heartbeat, they stood in the low glow of the fire, the air between them taut as a drawn bowstring. Then, without a word, Lucien reached for the smaller blade she'd trained with and pressed it into her palm. Stay at my side, he said. And if I tell you to run, you run. The horn sounded again, closer this time. The eastern gate was already splintering when they reached it. Hawkkin dove in swooping arcs, their wingbeats cutting through the air with the snap of banners in a storm. Beneath them, serpentkin slid between the trees, their blades low and gleaming, their hoods flaring like dark banners of war. Lucien vaulted the last steps, his voice a command that cracked through the night. Hold the line. Wolfkin guards closed ranks, their shields locking into a wall of fur and iron. Arrows hissed upward, catching the faint shimmer of a wing before thudding into bark or flesh. Somewhere to her left, Juliet saw a hawkkin fall, wings folding as he crashed into the moss with a scream. She stayed close to Lucien, just as he'd ordered, her smaller blade gripped tight enough that her knuckles ached. The scent of blood and churned earth filled her lungs, grounding her even as fear surged in her veins. A serpentkin darted from the shadows, too fast, a glint of steel aimed for Lucien's unguarded side. Juliet didn't think, she moved. The blade in her hand met his wrist in a short, desperate strike. He hissed, recoiling, and Lucien's sword finished the motion she'd started, sending the attacker collapsing into the undergrowth. Lucien's eyes met hers for a fraction of a heartbeat. Not praise, not relief, acknowledgement. Then the wards shuddered. It was a sound more than a sight, a deep, resonant crack that seemed to ripple through the roots beneath their feet. Juliet's mark, dormant since the hollow, flared once, painfully, as if something old and unwelcome had taken notice. Above, the largest hawkkin she'd ever seen descended. His wings were tipped in gold, his talons wrapped in iron, and his gaze locked not on Lucien, but on her. The air tightened. She knew, without knowing how, that this was no random raid. This was a strike aimed at her heart, her existence in their ion. Lucien moved between them in a blur, his sword catching the envoy's descending strike in a burst of sparks. The impact drove him back a step, boots skidding on the moss-slick stone. Run, he barked. She didn't. Instead, she dropped low, ducking beneath the sweep of a talon, and slashed upward. Her blade didn't pierce deep, but it caught flesh enough to make the envoy's wings flare wide in pain and fury. The battle surged around them, but Juliet heard only the rush of her own breath and the pounding of her heart. She was no longer the girl who had stepped off a cliff. She was here. Fighting. The envoy's beak opened in a sharp cry, and somewhere beyond the gate, the serpents pressed harder, sensing their moment. The wards would not hold another breach. Lucien's voice cut through the chaos. To the root line. They fell back toward the ancient silverash tree whose roots fed the village wards. If it fell, their ion would be open to every enemy that walked or flew. And from the way the envoy's eyes followed them, Juliet knew that was exactly the plan. Chapter 30, The Last Howl. The den's high stone archways shook with the pounding of war drums. From the western quarter, the Hawk clan's banners cut through the torchlight, silver and black feathers, sharp as spears in the wind. From the east, serpentkin warriors slid forward in silent waves, their armor scaled and gleaming like molten bronze. Juliet stood at the threshold of the hollow, her fingers tight around the hilt of her blade. Lucien was at her side, still pale from the blood moon ritual but upright, a predator's tension in every line of his frame. His golden eyes flicked over the advancing forces and then down to her, the faintest nod, not of command, but of a deep, unshakable trust. The lion matriarch stepped forward from the ranks of the neutral clans, her voice a low growl that carried over the approaching army. This ends before blood stains the council stones, she warned. The Hawk ambassador's feathers flared, his voice slicing through the cool night air. The prophecy still stands. That human's mark may be gone, but she remains the moon's chosen weapon. If she stays, the Wolf King falls, and so does their ion. Juliet forced her voice steady, her heart a drum against her ribs. Then why strike now, if you truly fear prophecy? This isn't justice. It's ambition. A ripple of unease stirred the crowd. Even some serpentkin shifted, their hoods half lowered. The Hawk's eyes narrowed. A human cannot speak for our world. Lucien's low growl rolled across the hollow like thunder. She doesn't speak for you. She stands with me. And I speak for Therion. The ambassador's talons curled around his spear, the point flashing in the moonlight. Then prove it, or die defending your mistake. The first arrow flew. Lucien moved before Juliet could draw breath, his form blurring into the massive silver-black wolf. The arrow shattered harmlessly against his shoulder guard as he charged, a roar shaking the stone underfoot. Wolf clan warriors surged after him, and the hollow became a whirlwind of steel, claw, and magic. Juliet's blade met a serpentkin's curved fang dagger, the force jolting up her arm. She twisted, drove her hilt into his ribs, and sent him sprawling. The moon's silver light flashed over the scene, Lucien tearing through the hawk vanguard, rear-darting between strikes like wildfire, the lion matriarch holding back an entire flank with nothing but raw power. And then Juliet saw it, the hawk ambassador, slipping away toward the cliff's edge, a signal horn in hand. One blast, and their hidden reserve forces would pour into the hollow, overwhelming them all. Juliet ran. Her boots struck the stone path, her breath burning in her lungs, every heartbeat echoing the same truth: if he called reinforcements, the den would fall. The horn was halfway to his beak when Juliet slammed into him. They tumbled dangerously close to the cliff's drop, talons raking her arm. She bit back a cry, wrestled for the horn, and, with the same motion, drove the pommel of her blade into his temple. The ambassador fell still. The horn rolled away, silent. Juliet stood there for a moment, chest heaving, the wind off the cliff tangling her hair like the night she had first arrived in Therion. Only this time, she was not falling. She was standing. And behind her, the tide of battle began to turn. The serpentkin elder hissed in fury as his hawk ally crumpled near the cliff, the signal horn lying useless on the stone. "Fall back," he commanded, but his voice lacked the weight it had carried hours before. The line of serpent warriors wavered, their advance slowing as wolf and lion closed ranks around the hollow. Lucien's wolf form stalked forward through the battlefield, silver-black fur matted with streaks of blood and moonlight. When he shifted back to his human shape, the transformation rippled through the air like a pulse of stormlight, a reminder that this was not just a king, but a predator who had chosen restraint until now. "You came here for power," Lucien said, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the stone amphitheater. "And you thought prophecy would excuse your greed." The lion matriarch stepped up beside him, her manner like molten gold in the torchlight. "The council will remember this night," she said, her eyes sweeping over the hawk and serpent ranks. "You raised arms against the king and sought to spill blood on sacred ground. By ancient law, that is treason." A ripple of growls and murmurs swept the gathered clans. The hawk warriors shifted uneasily, their leader lying unconscious at the cliff's edge. The serpentkin elders hood flattened, a silent acknowledgement of defeat. Juliet moved to stand at Lucien's side, the king's cloak heavy on her shoulders, the blade still warm in her grip. She didn't need to speak, her presence was its own declaration. Rhea's voice rang clear across the hollow: "The human came to us a stranger. Tonight, she fought beside our king. Whatever the moon's will was, she has made her own choice. She stays, not as prey, but as one of us." Silence held for a long moment. Then the lion matriarch lifted her chin. "Let the vote be taken." One by one, the clan representatives stepped forward. Wolf, lion, bear, fox. Even a pair of reluctant hawks, stripped of their ambassador's command, nodded their assent. Only the serpentkin abstained, retreating into shadow without another word. Lucien's gaze never left Juliet. The tension in his shoulders eased just enough for her to see it, the smallest breath of relief in a man who had held too much weight for too long. The lion matriarch's voice cut through the air again: "The coup is ended. The wolf king holds the hollow. And the human holds the right to stand at his side." A deep howl rose from the wolf clan ranks, taken up by fox and bear, echoing into the forest beyond. Juliet felt it in her bones, in the mark that was no longer cursed but still bound to this land, to this people. Lucien stepped closer, his words meant only for her. "You could have run when the horn was in his hand." Juliet met his golden eyes, steady. "I told you I'm not prey." His jaw tightened, not with restraint this time, but with something warmer, something that looked dangerously like pride. The night was theirs. The rebellion had broken. But as the moonlight touched the den's high walls, Juliet knew there was still one more thing left to face. Chapter 31, The Hunt That Found Me. The den was quiet again. Too quiet. The sounds of the hollow, the shifting of armor, the low rumble of beastkin voices had faded into the forest like the dying embers of a fire. Juliet stood alone in the high-vaulted hall, the torches throwing soft, golden light across the walls etched with ancient runes. The blade she had carried all night lay across her palms, its weight suddenly unfamiliar now that it wasn't needed to keep anyone alive. She expected Lucien to come to her first. He didn't. When he did appear in the doorway, it wasn't with the sure stride of a victorious king, it was slower, heavier, as if every step carried the echo of the night's fight. His golden eyes found her instantly, and the exhaustion there made her chest ache. "You should be resting," she said. He ignored the words and crossed the space between them until the torchlight haloed his shoulders. "You stayed." It wasn't a question, but the way he said it made it sound like one, like he still couldn't quite believe it. "You told me once the moon called me here," she replied softly. "But tonight, I think I called myself." Lucien's gaze was unreadable for a long moment. Then he lifted a hand, hesitating before his fingers brushed her cheek. The warmth of his touch cut through the memory of cold steel and prophecy, a quiet comfort in the lingering shadow of war. "I spent years letting the prophecy dictate what I was allowed to keep," he said. "I let it take my mate, my child, my trust in fate." His thumb lingered just beneath her jaw, where her pulse beat fast beneath his touch. "And then you arrived. And I thought, the moon is playing another cruel game." Juliet's throat tightened, but she didn't look away. "And now?" The corner of his mouth curved, not quite a smile, more like the first sign of one after a long winter. "Now I think, maybe it was giving me back what I lost. In a shape I didn't expect." Her heart felt too big for her chest. She could still smell the forest on him, the faint trace of blood and ash under the steadier scent that had always been his: smoke, pine, and something that made her think of night air over warm skin. "Lucien." He cut her off gently, his voice low but certain. "I will not lose you to prophecy, to fear, or to my own mistakes. If you must leave, it will be because you chose it. Not because the moon took you from me." Juliet realized, in that moment, she'd already made her choice. The moon was full and silver, hanging low over the den's open courtyard. The battle was over. The council had dispersed. But the air still felt charged, as if the stones themselves were holding their breath. Juliet stepped outside, the king's cloak trailing behind her, the ceremonial blade now sheathed at her hip. She could hear the forest, not just the wind in the branches, but the deep, resonant life of it. Howls rose and fell in the distance, a song that seemed to know her name. Lucien found her there, framed in the moonlight. His armor was gone, replaced by the simple leather and fur of a hunter. There was no crown on his head, no sign of the night's violence, only the man who had caught her from the cliff, who had held her in the darkness when she didn't want to wake. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at her, as if memorizing the way she stood with her shoulders square, her chin lifted, not prey, not an interloper, but someone who belonged. "Finally," he said, "you were never prey. You were the hunt that found me." The words stole her breath. Not because they were poetic, but because they were true. She had come here broken, ready to vanish. And somehow, she had found herself in the danger, in the trials, in him. She stepped toward him, her fingers brushing the silver torque he wore around his neck, the mark of the Wolf King. Then she lifted it, slowly, and placed it over her own head. It settled against her collarbones like a promise. "I stay," she said simply. "Not because you caught me, but because I choose this. I choose you." Something in Lucien's eyes shifted, the fierce, unshakable control giving way to something warmer, unguarded. He didn't kneel. Neither did she. They stood facing one another as equals, the silver moon casting them both in its light. From the forest came the sound of a howl, long, deep, and joined by others until the night was filled with it. Not a warning. Not a call to arms. Recognition. Juliet took Lucien's hand, lacing her fingers through his. The talk was cool against her skin, the cloak heavy across her shoulders. But in her chest, her heart felt light. For the first time in years, Lucien smiled without shadow. And beneath the 3 moons of Therion, the human and the wolf king stood together not as fate's captives, but as the ones who had rewritten it. Epilogue. Long after the council fires had gone cold and the last echoes of the howling had faded into the deep forest, Therion slept in a quiet, peaceful rhythm. In the den's highest balcony, 2 figures stood as silent sentinels. One was wrapped in the silvered talk of a queen, the other with golden eyes turned to the moons, a quiet intensity in his gaze. The wind carried the scent of pine, stone, and something new, a promise unbound by prophecy. And when the first, soft light of dawn touched the treetops, it found them still there, hand in hand, as if they had been carved into the heart of the realm itself, their love a silent, powerful testament to a future they had chosen together. Thank you for listening. If this story touched your heart, give it a like and subscribe for more beautiful tales. Tap the next thumbnail to continue your journey.